Have you ever wondered what really happens when you decide to step away? I'm not talking about physically disappearing, but about that silent, intimate decision to let go of the invisible threads that connect you to others. What truly happens in the hearts and minds of people when you choose to withdraw, not out of anger or resentment, but simply because of a deep need to be with yourself? Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." And perhaps that's exactly why stepping away carries such an unsettling power. When you choose silence, you're not just absent. You're disrupting a delicate balance, a subtle game of expectations, projections, and needs that others may not even realize they've placed on you. The most intriguing part? It's not your absence that hurts, it's what it reveals. Because when you step away, you leave a void. And that void, no matter how silent, holds a brutal power. It forces others to confront what they fear the most: their own insecurities, their unmet expectations, and the truths they'd rather keep hidden. But here's an even more uncomfortable thought. What if what truly hurts others isn't your absence itself, but the fact that without you around, they can no longer project their insecurities, desires, and fears onto you? This journey won't be easy. We're about to dive into a territory most people prefer to avoid. We'll explore the depths of what really happens when you choose to step away, the invisible impact, the unspoken feelings, the unexpected reactions. And in the end, you might discover that the true power of stepping away isn't in the void you leave behind, but in the transformation it triggers in yourself and in others. Imagine an ordinary day. You're there, present, perhaps without even realizing how much your energy influences the space around you. People seek you out, listen to you, feel you. Now, imagine that. Suddenly you decide to step away. It's not an act of anger nor a cry for help. It's a silent, almost imperceptible movement driven by a pure and simple need to be with yourself. The intriguing part? This seemingly harmless withdrawal carries an invisible force strong enough to shake deeper structures than you can imagine. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." And it is precisely in this act of stepping away that you begin to awaken, not just for yourself, but for those around you. Because when you remove yourself from the scene, you don't just leave an empty space, you disrupt a silent balance that often held more weight than it should have. Human relationships are built on subtle exchanges, unspoken expectations, and roles assumed, often without even realizing it. You may be the confidant, the emotional support, the source of inspiration, or in some cases, even the scapegoat for others' frustrations. And when you step away, these invisible roles dissolve. Suddenly, those who unconsciously relied on your presence find themselves lost, unmoored in the face of a void they don't know how to fill. The impact of distance is silent but profound. It's not just about physical absence, it's about a reconfiguration of emotional dynamics. It's as if, by stepping away, you remove a key piece from a delicate balancing act, causing everything to start unraveling. The discomfort doesn't stem solely from your absence, but from the collapse of the projections others had built around you. But why does this happen? The answer lies in something deeper than mere longing. When you choose to distance yourself, you break a cycle of expectations and projections. People don't see you as you truly are, but as they need you to be. You become a mirror in which they reflect their own insecurities, desires, and fears. And when that mirror shatters, the reflection disappears, forcing them to face themselves in a raw and often painful way. This is the true power of stepping away. By nature, it is an act of liberation, not just for you, as you finally carve out the space to reconnect with your own essence, but also, paradoxically, for those who remain. Because in the end, your absence forces others to confront their own emotional dependencies, to recognize just how much they leaned on you to avoid dealing with their own vulnerabilities. And there is something even more powerful in this process. The silence of distance creates a space where reflection becomes inevitable. Absence speaks louder than any words ever could. It reveals what was hidden beneath layers of routine and convenience. And in the midst of that discomfort, the possibility of transformation arises for both you and them. By walking away, you're not just choosing yourself. Without realizing it, you're giving others a rare and painful opportunity for growth. And that is the true invisible power of distance. It triggers a process of self-discovery on both sides, even if neither of them asked for it. What really happens when someone distances themselves from us? The first feeling is usually easy to identify. Longing, a palpable, almost physical absence, as if the space once occupied by that person had turned into a silent echo. But as time passes, the feeling deepens, revealing a more uncomfortable truth. The void left by someone doesn't bother us just because of what's missing. It bothers us because of what it forces us to see. Carl Jung taught us that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And that is exactly what happens when we face the distancing of someone who, in some way, upheld invisible parts of our emotional structure. The void, instead of being just an empty space, becomes a mirror, and what it reflects is often not easy to face. When someone pulls away, we are not just dealing with the loss of their presence, we are confronting the projections we placed on them. After all, how often do we see others through the filter of our own needs? And maybe they were a source of support, a distraction, an escape, or even a mirror in which we reflected our own insecurities and desires. And when they step away, they force us to face the most dreaded question: who am I without this person? This void goes beyond mere longing. It touches deeper places, the unacknowledged loneliness, the fears we always try to suppress, the emotional dependencies we prefer not to recognize. That is why distance can be so unsettling. It forces those who remain to confront an uncomfortable truth. Perhaps they didn't miss you, but rather the role you played in their lives. Imagine a silent room. At first, the silence seems like nothing more than the absence of sound. But over time, you start to hear what was always there, hidden beneath the noise. Your own thoughts, your insecurities, your rawest truths. Emptiness works the same way. When you step away, people don't just deal with your absence, they are forced to listen to what the noise of your presence had kept buried. This process can be brutal. When someone can no longer project their expectations onto you, discomfort arises. Anger, resentment, sadness, all these emotions come to the surface, not because you hurt them, but because your absence exposed something they weren't ready to face, their dependency on you. And that dependency is often not about love or affection, but about emotional stability, comfort, and security. The most intriguing part is that, more often than not, the one who distances themselves has no intention of causing such a storm. It is a silent act, driven by an internal need for peace, for reconnection with oneself. But paradoxically, this deeply personal gesture can be a powerful trigger for those who remain. Because emptiness, in essence, does not reveal what was lost, it exposes what was never faced. And here lies the true purpose of this emptiness. It is both an ending and a beginning, a space where the pain of absence can give way to reflection and where discomfort can transform into growth. But for that to happen, one must have the courage to look at what the emptiness reveals. Distancing, no matter how painful, carries a transformative potential that few recognize right away. It reveals not only what we feel for others, but also what we hide from ourselves. And in this process, a rare opportunity emerges, the chance to rebuild, not the lost presence, but the self, more aware, more authentic, freer from the invisible ties that, until then, remained hidden beneath the routine of togetherness. There is an unsettling truth in every human relationship. People don't see you as you truly are, but as they need you to be. It may sound harsh, but it's a subtle and powerful reality. We are often shaped by the expectations of others, by the silent projections they place upon us, many times without even realizing it. And when you choose to step away, that illusion shatters, and the impact can be devastating. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But what if it's not about irritation, but loss?" Distance forces those around you to confront their own projections. Suddenly, the role you played in their lives ceases to exist. And what's left? A discomfort that reveals a harsh truth. Perhaps you were never truly seen for who you are, but rather for what you represented in their lives. You may have been the shoulder to cry on, the advisor, the emotional support, or even the symbol of something they longed to achieve or overcome. When you step away, what others saw in you vanishes, and the reflection they projected onto you fades. The pain they feel is not truly about your absence, but about the collapse of the illusion they created. Think about it. How many times has someone told you they needed you, that they couldn't move forward without your support? In many cases, these words don't reflect genuine love, but rather a dependence on a role you, consciously or unconsciously, accepted to play. When you remove yourself from that dynamic, the other person feels lost, not because of you, but because of the void left by the reflection of themselves that you carried. And then comes the most intense moment of discomfort. People begin to realize that the real distress isn't in your absence, but in what they now have to face within themselves. Your presence served as a relief, a distraction, a way to avoid looking directly at their own vulnerabilities. When you leave, they don't just lose you, they lose the comfort of avoiding their own shadows. The most curious thing is that, in an attempt to cope with this loss, many people create new narratives about you. Some idealize you, turning your absence into a symbol of something grand, as if you had suddenly become an almost mythical figure. Others, however, demonize you, crafting justifications that help them deal with the pain. He was selfish. She never really cared. These narratives aren't about you. They are attempts to reorganize an inner world that was destabilized by your departure, and while all of this happens, you become a mystery. Your absence turns into a blank space that others try to fill with their own interpretations. But none of these versions are true because they are not about who you are. They are about what you represented. This is one of the hardest truths to accept when stepping away, realizing that to many, you weren't a person, but a role, a mirror, a support. And by walking away, you take from others the ability to keep relying on a comfortable illusion. This can trigger intense reactions, anger, sadness, resentment, not because you did anything wrong, but because, without realizing it, you became the catalyst for a painful process of self-confrontation. However, this pain can be an invitation to transformation. For them, it can be the beginning of a growth process, a chance to realize that their projections define no one but themselves. For you, it is the opportunity to break free from imposed roles, to reconnect with your true essence, free from the expectations of others. In the end, what matters most is not how others see you, but who you become when you decide to stop being what they expect you to be. Human beings have an almost instinctive need for control, not necessarily an authoritarian kind of control, but a subtle one. The desire for predictability, for keeping things in their right place, for ensuring that the world around them keeps spinning according to the rules they have consciously or unconsciously learned to follow. And at the heart of human relationships, this need for control also manifests through the emotional dynamics we create with others. But what happens when someone pulls away, suddenly breaking these dynamics? Discomfort emerges, relentless, and the reason is simple. Their absence destabilizes a structure that once felt secure. Carl Jung believed that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And distance, no matter how silent or peaceful, forces people to do the exact opposite, to face what they've been trying to hide, their deepest insecurities, their emotional vulnerabilities, and most of all, the loss of a control that was never as solid as it seemed. When you step away, those who depended on your emotional presence are forced to confront the absence of the anchor you often represented. Maybe you were the one who always listened, the one who always gave in, who kept the peace, or simply played the role of support. When that presence disappears, their internal balance is thrown off, and without the invisible support you provided, they are left to bear the full weight of their own emotions. The first feeling that usually arises is denial. This is temporary. They'll come back. They just need some time. But as time passes and the reality of distance settles in, something deeper begins to stir. Fear. Fear of losing something they may not have fully understood. Fear of facing their own fragility. Above all, fear of admitting there was a dependency, not on you as a person, but on the role you played. And then comes anger, a confused kind of anger, often manifesting as resentment. How could they leave me like this? They never really cared. But deep down, that anger isn't about you. It stems from the discomfort of losing control, from the disruption of the emotional balance your presence once upheld. It's a desperate cry from someone who has realized, too late, that they weren't as independent as they once believed. This discomfort becomes even more evident when people realize that behind your absence, there is no intention to hurt or punish. You didn't distance yourself out of malice, but out of necessity. And that forces them to face an even more painful truth. Your presence was never an obligation. It was a choice. And now, without that choice, they are confronted with the emptiness of their own internal solitude. Distance breaks patterns and, in doing so, shatters the illusion of control. For those left behind, this feeling can be overwhelming. Suddenly, certainties crumble and what once seemed stable reveals itself as fragile. Absence forces an internal reorganization, a new construction of balance that this time cannot depend on someone else. But amid this emotional chaos, a rare opportunity arises: growth. Because, as painful as it may be, losing control can be the first step toward true emotional autonomy. It's an invitation for those left behind to learn how to sustain their own peace without relying on someone who, until then, had unknowingly served as an anchor. And for you, this realization is also liberating. Distance reveals a powerful truth. You are not responsible for anyone else's emotional balance. Your presence should not be a forced pillar of support, but a conscious choice, free from obligations that drain your energy and obscure your essence. The discomfort of losing control is not, therefore, the end of a relationship. It is the beginning of a new phase, where each person must learn to stand on their own. And sometimes the greatest act of love and respect you can offer someone is allowing them to face the discomfort of their own emptiness. When you decide to step away, something unexpected happens. Each person affected by your absence reacts in a unique way, and these reactions are not just about you. They are, above all, about what you represented to them. The void you leave behind is not uniform. It takes shape according to each individual's expectations, fears, and projections. And in that moment, a fascinating phenomenon occurs. The masks begin to fall, revealing emotions that had been hidden for a long time. Carl Jung once said, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of others." And when you step away, the people around you are forced to confront not your absence, but their own shadows. How do they handle it? Each in their own way. Some idealize, others demonize, and a rare few have the courage to face the raw and unfiltered truth. For some, the void becomes a space of idealization. These people start to see you as someone greater than you really were, an almost mythical, irreplaceable figure. Suddenly, your absence turns you into someone perfect, the incomparable friend, the ideal partner, the pillar that no one else can replace. This idealization is not about who you were, but about the unbearable feeling of loss. Idealizing you is their way of coping with the discomfort of realizing that they may have failed to appreciate your presence when they should have. On the other hand, there are those who choose to demonize your absence. Instead of dealing with the pain of loss, they turn it into resentment. He was selfish. She never really cared. Demonizing becomes a defense against real pain, the pain of admitting dependence, weakness, and fear. It's easier to turn you into a villain than to acknowledge their own vulnerability. In this case, anger is a defense mechanism, a way to avoid facing the emptiness left behind. But there is also a third group, the rarest and perhaps the most genuine. These are the ones who, in the face of your absence, choose introspection. Instead of projecting anger or building myths, they look inward and ask themselves, why does this absence hurt so much? These are individuals who have the courage to face their own fragility, to recognize the emotional dependence they may have never admitted before. For these few, the void you leave behind becomes a mirror, reflecting old fears, unhealed wounds, and long-avoided truths. Reactions are not linear. They can change over time. Someone who initially demonizes you may, after months, begin to feel genuine longing and eventually understand the reasons behind your departure. Likewise, those who idealize your absence may, at some point, recognize that they placed you on a pedestal that never should have existed. The most curious thing is that these reactions say nothing about who you are. They only reflect the role you played in these people's lives. Your absence becomes a blank canvas onto which each person projects their fears, frustrations, and unfulfilled hopes. Paradoxically, you become more present in your absence than you ever were in your presence. And here lies the true impact of this process. Distance forces people to rebuild themselves. They must learn to fill the void you left behind, not with new projections, but with their own inner strength. It is a painful process, but also profoundly liberating, because in the end, true growth does not come from avoiding the void, but from facing it and discovering that even in absence, there is room for self-knowledge and transformation. And while they deal with their reactions, you, on your side, must also face your own emotions, because walking away is not an easy act. It is an act of courage, one that requires accepting not only solitude, but also the consequences of breaking dynamics that, no matter how toxic they were, still provided a deceptive sense of security. Every reaction to the void is a reflection of human depths, and within each one, in its pain and discomfort, lies the seed of possible liberation. The decision to walk away, no matter how lonely it may seem, never impacts only the one who leaves. It resonates with those who stay, with those who witness the emptiness taking shape, with those who are forced to confront the absence of a role they often didn't even realize mattered so much. In the end, the true impact of this choice goes far beyond the initial pain. It reveals itself as a silent invitation to mutual growth. Carl Jung once said, "There is no awakening of consciousness without pain." And this statement carries even more weight when we think about human relationships, because stepping away is more often than not an act of self-discovery, a journey inward in search of peace, clarity, and emotional autonomy. But what many fail to realize is that by walking away, you are not only creating space for your own transformation, you are also unintentionally becoming a catalyst for the evolution of others. At first, for those who remain, the separation can feel like a devastating blow. Denial, anger, sadness, and finally, acceptance emerge as inevitable stages of this process of loss. But as the initial pain begins to fade, something deeper surfaces, the need for reconstruction. And it is at this point that growth begins. Absence forces people to ask themselves, How much of my stability depended on this presence? This question, both uncomfortable and revealing, demands a reassessment of one's own emotional foundations. Without the support, without the projection, without the constant reflection of their needs being met, they are challenged to find within themselves what they once sought in you. And it is in this moment that the opportunity arises for them to become more self-sufficient, more aware, and freer from the invisible chains of emotional dependence. On the other hand, stepping away is also fertile ground for your own growth. Choosing to distance yourself, especially from relationships that drain your energy or limit your development, is an act of courage. It is the recognition of your own need for space, for silence, for freedom. And in this newly created space, you discover something powerful: the right to exist outside of others' expectations, free from the pressures of being the pillar, the support, or the reflection of someone else's needs. Through this process, you begin to understand that not every connection must be maintained at all costs. Some relationships need to be broken in order to be rebuilt on new foundations, healthier, more authentic, more respectful of your true self. And often, by walking away, you realize that the greatest act of self-love is also an act of respect for the other, allowing them to grow without depending on you. The true impact of distance is not in the initial suffering, but in the silent transformation it brings. It's like a storm that, once it passes, leaves the ground fertile for something new to bloom. Pain, discomfort, and loss are merely the first phases of this process. Necessary, yes, but temporary. In the end, what remains is the possibility of rebirth. And here lies the most beautiful irony of all. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is not your constant presence, but rather the space for them to discover themselves without you. And while that space may be painful, it carries a transformative potential that few experiences can offer. On your side, growth manifests as a newfound understanding of yourself. You learn to set boundaries, to respect your own needs, and to realize that your presence should never be an obligation. You become freer, lighter, more connected to your true essence. For those left behind, distance can mark the beginning of a deep internal journey. A journey that forces them to rebuild their identity, to find strength where there was once dependence, to face fears that had been quietly suppressed. In the end, the true impact of stepping away is not about leaving someone behind, but about making space for both to grow. And this is a difficult yet necessary lesson. Sometimes the greatest act of love, for yourself and for others, is having the courage to walk away. And now, after all this, I ask you, what does it really mean to walk away? Is it an act of selfishness, an escape, or is it perhaps one of the most courageous and necessary decisions we can make in life? Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And walking away is exactly that, a deep and solitary journey into your own shadow. It is an act of courage, not weakness. It is recognizing that sometimes, to truly find yourself, you must first get lost and allow others to get lost without you. The true impact of walking away is not in the silence you leave behind, but in the echo it creates. For those who remain, your absence can be a shock, a brutal discomfort, a disruption in a balance they didn't even know existed. But within that void lies a unique opportunity, a chance for growth, for self-awareness, for facing one's own dependencies, and perhaps breaking free from them. And for you, walking away is a chance to return to your center, to understand that you don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, that your existence cannot be defined solely by what others expect of you. Walking away is not rejecting someone. It is, in many cases, the greatest act of self-love and respect for the other person's path. Because when you let go of someone's hand, you give them the opportunity to learn how to walk on their own. And now, I leave you with one final thought. What remains of you when no one expects anything from you? This question may feel unsettling, but it holds immense power. Because the moment you free yourself from others' expectations, you discover who you truly are. And that, perhaps, is the greatest revolution of all. If you've made it this far, I know that, in some way, this message has touched something inside you. Maybe you're going through a period of distance. Maybe you're feeling the weight of someone's absence. Or perhaps you're just trying to understand the emptiness that has settled somewhere in your life. I know how hard it is. I've been in that place, where silence speaks louder than words, and where every step away feels like diving into uncharted waters. I remember a time when I had to distance myself from someone I loved deeply. Not because I cared any less, but because at that moment I needed to find myself. And as painful as it was in that space of silence that I discovered my true strength, and surprisingly allowed that person to find theirs as well. So I invite you to reflect. The emptiness doesn't define me, it frees me. If this phrase resonated with you, leave it in the comments. Share your experience, or simply drop a sign that this message found a place in your heart. And of course, if this journey made sense to you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Here, we talk about the truths most people avoid, about the shadows that deep down we all need to face. And if you like this video, hit the like button and share it. Who knows? This message might be exactly what someone close to you needs to hear. Oh, and don't leave just yet. There's another video on the screen waiting for you, an even deeper dive into the human mind. I promise, it'll stir something in you in a way you might not even be expecting.